This week's tale of the Old Trapper is titled Old Trapper and the Mushroom Hunt by Shawn Henninger. As the long winter months begin to come to an end and the streams fill with water from the melting snow, the old trapper begins to have just one thing on his mind. Spring is around the corner. There is something about the April rains that brings all the blooming plants back to life. The trees begin to fill with leaves and the animals make their way back from their long winter break. With the rain and warming weather, there is something that the old trapper is excited about. Wild mushrooms. The old place that the old trapper made his home was known in the state to have some of the most delicious morel mushrooms. Some people had nicknamed them dryland fish, or hickory chickens, and even honeycomb mushrooms. No matter what people liked to call them, the old trapper knew they were delicious. Now, there are a lot of mushrooms that grow wild, and the old trapper was very careful to make sure that any mushroom he ate was safe. Now, mushroom hunting took a lot of walking in the woods, so the old trapper always made sure he had his perfect walking stick, water, and a small bit of jerky in case he got hungry. The old trapper would always start his mushroom hunting in one of two places. There were two big old trees that we would always find the best mushrooms at. Whenever he would go out, if there were mushrooms to be found, they would be there. Usually, if the old trapper did not find any mushrooms at either of these two trees, he would just call it a day and go back to his cabin. The old trapper made his way up the hill and was walking towards the first tree when he saw something slithering from behind it. He looked, and curled up was a timber rattlesnake. The timber rattlesnake was moving rather slow, so the old trapper knew it must have just slithered out of its winter den. "No worries, Mr. Snake," the old trapper thought. "I'll come back later and check this tree. I still have my second trusty mushroom tree." As the old trapper made his way to his second tree, he looked and saw curled off to the side a medium-sized black bear. Now, he's seen one or two black bear around these parts, but it's not that common. And a black bear out of his den was usually a hungry bear. So the old trapper thought to himself that he could check tree number 2 later. The old trapper made it a safe distance from the black bear and took a seat to drink some water and rethink his plan. Never in all his years had the old trapper skipped looking for mushrooms around both trees. He began to get flustered as the old trapper was one who liked to stick to his plan. But the rattlesnake and the bear had thrown him off. The old trapper finished his last bit of jerky and thought to himself, I could just go back to the cabin since my plan was ruined, or I could continue to have a wonderful day out in the woods looking for mushrooms. One choice, I'll go home grumpy with no mushrooms. The other choice, I'll be outside, get some much needed hiking in, and potentially have some mushrooms. So the old trapper did what he thought was best and continued on his mushroom hunt. Now, most times when you're hunting, you have to be quiet and sneak around. You find a spot to sit and wait for something to come your way. But with mushroom hunting, you don't have to worry about the mushrooms running away. Although there are some people that will tell you they will shrink back into the ground if disturbed, the old trapper always went off the trail when he was mushroom hunting, as the mushrooms tended to be around fallen trees or areas that were wet but got some sun. The old trapper began looking at a fallen tree, kicking around some of the bark, but no luck. As he kicked more bark off, he disturbed an anthill and decided to look closer. The old trapper had seen an anthill before, and some even bigger than this one, but he took the time to really investigate it. The ants were marching in line as they were hauling what looked to be some type of food into the anthill. There was a line going in and a line going out. Each ant was working to help the community. The old trapper followed the lines of ants as it went further and further down the log. As the old trapper reached the end, he could see that the line of ants must have gone over 100 feet all the way down to the creek. This was another great example of nature and something he might have missed if he went back to his cabin. The old trapper remembered a fence row he had put in years ago in an open field near the back of the old place. It was a bit of a walk, but sometimes he would find mushrooms there. So the old trapper began the hike. As he walked through the woods, he saw that the cardinals were out flying around. They were very beautiful birds and always brought calm when he saw them. It was as though a loved one lost was there just saying hello. Further up the hill, he heard the sound of a woodpecker on an old dead tree. The old trapper searched around the different trees until his eyes stopped as he spotted the red-headed woodpecker. It was making a hole in an old tree to make a new nest for the spring. Soon it would lay some eggs, and not much longer after, the eggs would hatch and some new woodpecker chicks would be born. The old trapper watched as he noticed other types of birds working off the winter rust, gathering twigs and straw for their new nest. It wasn't until he heard the faint sound of leaves that he looked up the hill and saw a large bobcat. The old trapper crouched down, as it had been years since he'd seen a bobcat. The bobcat stopped and looked around as if it had smelled the old trapper, but just then, 3 small bobcat kittens ran behind the bobcat. Oh, what a treat for the old trapper's eyes as he was seeing a mother bobcat taking her kittens out for their very first walk. The old trapper watched as the bobcat family made their way down the hill and soon out of sight. It was really amazing to see all of nature come to life. The old trapper continued up the hill and soon found himself searching along the fence row. After looking up and down a dozen times, he found no mushrooms. The old trapper began to feel a bit discouraged as he had not yet found a single mushroom. So he decided that he tried his best, but it was time to head back to the cabin. He hoped that maybe the bear and the snake had left his 2 favorite mushroom spots and he'd find some mushrooms there. All the way back towards those 2 trees, the old trapper saw more and more of the post-winter world. Squirrels were barking on the trees, a hawk flew above his head, the groundhogs were digging the fresh, wet earth, and even an owl decided to say hoot about the day. The old trapper reached his 2 mushroom trees and was delighted to see that both the bear and the snake had moved on. But his search turned up 0 mushrooms. The old trapper sulked as he made his way back to the cabin and went inside to prepare a mushroomless dinner. The food was good, but he still felt a little upset about the day. If that bear and snake had not been at the trees, he would have discovered that the mushrooms were not out yet and could have come back to the cabin sooner and not seen a bear or a snake or the woodpecker making its new home. The old trapper would have even missed out on the bobcat and her family. The old trapper sat back and shook his head as today he learned a valuable lesson. Just because your day may not go as you wanted, that does not mean that the day is ruined. If the old trapper had checked his 2 trees, he would have seen that there were no mushrooms and would not have experienced the wildlife in the post-winter day. The old trapper thought and guessed that this really was a wonderful day after all. The end. Thank you for listening to another episode of Tales of the Old Trapper, written by Shawn Henninger. To support Tales of the Old Trapper, have your parents leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and follow Old Trapper Pod on Twitter. Be sure to share the Tales of the Old Trapper with others that would enjoy the adventure of the Old Trapper. Until next week, go out and create a tale of your own.